Okay. So hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Fireside Chat. My name is Alysha, she, they pronouns, and I'm the Communications and Engagement Coordinator at WAVAW. We are coming from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, and we are honored to gather here today on their lands, and just want to take a moment to reflect on that. In today's stream, we'll be unpacking oppressive themes in digital media, mostly focusing on TV and movies. A note that this stream will be pre-recorded, so we will not be taking questions from chat, but we do have WAVA staff here with you in the chat today to moderate. As always, just a reminder that this is a non-judgmental space, as we are an anti-oppressive and decolonizing organization. We're gonna love our trash media, and we're not gonna police joy here, so let's keep it respectful. Being WAVA, we also want to warn you that we are going to be dissecting perhaps some of your favorite TV and movies too. So this may come with some feelings as things might get spicy. So we just want to allow space for that. All right, so I was recently speaking with one of our WAVAW counselors who shared that she used to have a blog that unpacked feminist themes in movies. And it got me thinking about how I've become quite attached and developed deep feels to some digital media. And in some cases, those feels have changed over time. The more I grew up, the more I learned about the authors or underlying plot themes, things tend to evolve. So we have some folks from WAVAW here today who felt equally as passionate about this subject, and we are really excited to get into it. We'll just start with some introductions. I'll get everyone to start with their name, their pronouns, job title, and the TV show or movie that you've done a 180 on since first watching it. Again, I'm Alysha. I'm the Communications and Engagement Coordinator, and my problematic media is The Twilight Saga by Stephanie Meyer, both the book and the movie series. I'll pass it off to Sarah to start.
Hey, I'm Sarah, they, them pronouns. I'm the Meaningful Inclusion Lead at WAVAW. This is Seamus, sorry, work from home life. I'm here to shit talk Harry Potter because holy crap, that was a 180 for me.
Hell yeah. Joslyn, do you want to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Joslyn. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the Victim Services Coordinator at WAVAW. So similar to Sarah, Harry Potter is also one that I'm prepared to shit talk, but also for me, Game of Thrones was a big one that I did a 180 on when I first read and watched to now. It was really problematic at the time of airing, but yeah, there's definitely been a lot of change in feelings for me.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. There's definitely a lot of discourse in the Game of Thrones community. So very excited to get your take on it. Dahlia?
Hello, everyone. My name is Dahlia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director at WAVAW. And I feel like maybe I'm going to explore more of my recommitment to my analysis for problematic media. I'm ready to talk about Handmaid's Tale. I did not love the book, but I love the TV show. Wasn't necessarily a 180. And then reality dating shows, really 180 on those, perhaps.
Love is Blind is, if y'all have watched season 3, we're gonna need to discuss. Absolutely. Karen, I'll pass it over to you.
Everyone, my name's Karen. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the sexual assault counselor and program coordinator at WAVAW. Oh my gosh, so much problematic media I have consumed and still have so many issues with, but also love. So I will have to say Harry Potter aloud. And the media, gangster rap music. I love to shit talk Twilight since the day it came out. White Lotus, Handmaid's Tale, you name it, I'm down to get into it and just talk about how interesting it is.
For sure. I haven't seen White Lotus personally, but I know that there are a couple folks here who have. So I'm excited to watch that discourse. So I think a recurring theme throughout this discussion is the importance of media literacy. I definitely look back at my childhood and I'm like, what the fuck, y'all? Why didn't you warn me about not applying fiction to my real life? The amount of years I spent pining after Edward Cullen, please. I consumed it unquestioningly, obviously. It was popular and it was painted as this idyllic image of who I thought I was supposed to love. There was almost no pushback from the rest of the people around me. No question of how toxic it was for the demographic of mostly young girls to be consuming this. And even in a lot of cases, it was condoned by the adults around us as well. I remember after I'd finished the books, I'd pass them off to my mom, and she was also a #twihard, or #twimom, I think they were called back then. So media literacy was not something that I was aware of or thought to apply to my life until I was an adult. And I'm hearing that now from a lot of folks too, especially in the Harry Potter world. How do y'all feel like media literacy would have helped you back then or even now?
I think I did have some level of media literacy. I was a little older getting into Harry Potter. So I would read the books, and I remember coming across the goblins for the first time. I was like, oh, that doesn't seem nice and how she's portraying them. It's a little racist. But I just kind of was just like powering through the books and was like so enamored in the world. I didn't think critically about it. And like I said in the blog post, the call is coming from inside the house, because holy crap, there is a lot of problematic stuff. It's not just the racism with the goblins. It's the grooming. It's the fat phobia. I mean, J.K. Rowling is a supreme turf, and you can make an argument that she's putting that in the books so that she's like indoctrinating a younger generation. It is terrifying. And looking back now, I'm like, please teach this in school. Please don't teach this as like good children's media. Teach this as like, let's shit talk this, and like, let's get to why this is a problem.
Supreme Turf just absolutely sent me. I love that. Thank you for that. And I 100% agree. I had older cousins of mine who were obsessed with Twilight. Like, I remember visiting them when I was a kid, and we went to go see Prisoner of Azkaban, like the midnight premiering of it. And like, same thing, like I read the books with their love and obsession of Twilight in my mind already. So I kind of didn't question it either. But there were definitely some themes where I was like, this feels really weird. Like, why are we making fun of Ron and his family for being poor? Like, that feels really gross. I know we all have feelings about Harry Potter as well, so I'll leave the floor open to anyone who wants to jump in.
Yeah, I find like, go ahead, Dahlia, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Karen.
I was gonna say, like, just sort of like on the concept of media literacy too, like one of the things that I think about in the context of music, like when I was growing up, we were listening to like, you know, Ashanti R&B, which was like, oh, my man, like, you're gonna cheat on me, or like go away, or be emotionally abusive, but I'm just never gonna leave you because I'm gonna hold it down, I'm a loyal ass bitch, like all these things, right? So when you think about that, and then you think about in your relationship, like also to like Edward Cullen, or like these messages that you're getting, you're like, oh yeah, well, I need to like stick by my man. Like, excuse me, I'm 16 years old, stick by my man. I can't even stick by myself. Like, what do you mean? And that really like, you know, perpetrated my whole existence with relationships, right? Because it's the music you're listening to, it's the things that you're watching on TV. It's like almost the advice that you're getting, right, all the time. And so having that media literacy where you're like, oh, but you know, this is not a role model. Whereas I think about the music that's coming out now, right? And like, I just love like Gen Zs, and like, you know, they're like, oh, that's abuse, or like they can name these emotions like really well. And you're like, who the fuck do you know this? But again, so much of the music is about like self-empowerment, self-knowing. Like there's just way more conversations about like healthy relationships, healthy dynamics. And I think it speaks like so well to what you're describing as like media literacy and understanding what it is that we're digesting and watching. Because not to blame, like I still love Ashanti, like no hate, but like those are not the messages that young people, young femme folks should be engaging in.
Yeah. I was gonna just share that I always say that R. Kelly was like the biggest groomer and basically pimp of my generation. Growing up a hip hop head, and I mean, we know Ashanti wasn't writing her lyrics to that either. So when I think back to like Aaliyah and the age ain't nothing but a number, that this young woman was you know, being married off to this grown-ass man. And we know now just how much violence he was perpetrating. But yeah, just riffing off of what you were saying, Karen, about all of those messages that are permeating all around us that groom us to be consistently looking for external validation instead of getting to know ourselves. Unfettered is an issue. I think that media literacy for me as a fairly new parent, as you know, my kiddo's 7 years old, I know that he's going to be exposed to all of the things that are in the world. And I'm not trying to create some imaginary bubble for him. What I think is important is that we get to consume, not everything, obviously, but consume good, you know, rich for fodder, for discussion media together. And then we can dissect that and have conversations about it, because it's true. You know, even as I became deeper invested in my analysis around feminism, I still didn't want to give up music that was problematic, but that I loved, or TV shows that I loved that were problematic. I just wanted to be able to apply those pieces of analysis to see like, how is this echoing what's happening in the world, and how do I want to apply what I think to those pieces. So
I love that you said that, Dahlia, about like holding those two pieces equally, being able to enjoy the things that are, nostalgic or that you love, or, that calls your attention, but also recognizing that they have the capacity to be problematic, and naming that is really important. I think that's where media literacy comes along, really, is being able to recognize both of those things. But again, where you get joy where you can these days. And if that means listening to 90s hip hop, R&B, so be it, I definitely grew up the same. I listened to a lot of 90s hip hop, R&B, all that good stuff, and thought that I could be someone in a rap. I remember my mom buying me an Adidas tracksuit and being like, "Oh, you look like that girl from the Missy Elliott video." And I thought that was just so cool. So I definitely grew up aspiring to be like one of those people. And yeah, especially as I age, I've been questioning my identity in that way. Like, I can be someone who is like seen as hard and like loves these kinds of things, but I can still be soft and vulnerable, and recognize that like, just because I want to emulate that style or, listen to that kind of music, I don't need to fully embody that practice or that attitude. So I'm glad you said that. Speaking of holding two things equally, kind of using trash as a treat, if you will, I'm wondering how our feminist analysis now looks at these pieces of media and can recognize rape culture in them. So what piece of media have you looked at and can see now, oh, that's absolutely perpetuating rape culture, and like, I need to do, as you said, Dahlia, justice for my kid, and making sure that like he can recognize that this is not okay, but can still enjoy it. So how do y'all feel about like the normalization of rape culture in media?
I mean, I think it's still very much normalized. Like, I think like from the media that like we consumed as young people, like I think about shows that I used to watch in like the 90s and stuff, and the way that like certain types of relationships were really normalized. Like, for example, I was rewatching Dawson's Creek recently, and in the first season, Pacey has a relationship with a teacher, and there's like no like challenging of that. And I think part of it was also like the gender roles in that relationship. Like, Pacey was a young male student who like seemed very mature for his age and was like seen as like a stud. But like, it was a relationship that was based on like unequal power relations and was based in grooming, and like, but that was never a topic that like came up surrounding that relationship. But I think now like that discourse is starting to change, but I still see like a lot of romanticization of like abusive relationships still in media. Like, I was watching the new House of the Dragon show, and there's a lot of that still in that. Yeah, and I find in that genre specifically, there's a lot of normalization of these like really violent relationships or grooming as well. So I don't know, I think it's like it's shifted, but I don't know if like there's like people are still, I think people in the discourse are able to like talk about it more now and like identify it more than they were before, which is great that we're able to like have those critical discussions that maybe we weren't having like 15, 20 years ago.
The 90s were really bad for that stuff too. I'm thinking of like, because like you mentioned Dawson's Creek, thank you, because I was going to say that. Hell yeah, 90s kids. So that was a problem. But there's also like all those news stories in the 90s, like teachers and kids, like teachers seducing kids, which was creepy as hell. So I feel like Dawson's Creek was like, oh, this is popular and it's edgy, it's in the news, let's put it in the show. And I'm like, that's gross, don't do that. And then there's something like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which that's a whole other, we can do a whole thing on just Buffy the Vampire Slayer and how that's trash. But I still watch it and love it and yell at the TV all the time. But like, there's so many things you could pick about that, like the violence, the metaphors of queerness is bad, and you know, there's so many gay tropes in that. Like the 90s were a garbage fire for queer representation and just for shitty rape culture. And it's gotten better, but like it's still there and it still permeates, and we have to like get queer writers and get like better people in writers' rooms to fix this shit.
This is absolutely reminding me of a few different things. Speaking of like teacher student grooming relationships, Pretty Little Liars is like a really good modern example of that, because I think her name is Arya in the show. She's seen as like the mature one of the group, and she like goes to a bar after her parents get in a fight or something like that. They're going through divorce, so she like gets into a bar and like meets this cool guy, and like, oh, he's older, goes to college, oh, that's so exciting. Which is also kind of in a way like perpetuating rape culture, because like the like bar scene and like the anonymity of it can be really creepy and gross and like predatory. But then add on to that he turns out to be her teacher, and that's just like a whole other level of messed up. And they spend like multiple seasons pining after each other, and it just never goes well, never seems to end. But then going back to talking about like queer-phobic themes in different TV shows in the 90s, I'm thinking of Friends. I tried to rewatch that recently, I think in the last 2 years. I was like, this is awful. And I know Friends is so popular, but I absolutely, when I meet someone and I'm like, oh, what's your favorite TV show? And they tell me Friends, a little red flag goes off in my mind. I know we said no judgment, but like, please.
That's good judgment. That's not judgment.
Thank
Talk
you for
about
validating me.
rewatching series. Okay, so y'all are talking about the 90s, and I was like in high school in the 90s. But talk about the 80s. Like I've tried rewatching like Three's Company and The Love Boat. I mean, it is the most atrocious, like the sexism that and the racism that is front and center, with no attempt at subversive undertones. It is right in your face. It is horrifying.
Wasn't the whole point of, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
The whole point of Three's Company was that he was the gay roommate, and that's why he was allowed to be.
That's why he was allowed to be around women.
Which is fucked up.
Yeah, it's horrifying.
I don't know anything about that show, but is it kind of like Will and Grace? Like that's what I'm
Oh, dude, no.
gathering.
No, it's way worse. So much worse.
Stupid blonde, pretend gay male roommate, smarter brunette that should always be undermined for her skills, meets like rental unit with the old creepy landlord downstairs with his wife, who's like always drunk and doesn't really know what her husband's up to. It's just horrendous. Anyways, just fascinating to like think about decades of how things like are also mirroring kind of the politics of the time. And yeah. Okay, age-wise, what about the vampires that live for thousands of years and then get to pretend as though they are the same age or within the same cohort? I'm a Vampire Diaries trash watcher, and you know, like Stefan has lived like 10 million lifetimes and then gets to like meet Elena in her high school moment without disclosing all of the things that he's learned over time. I'm curious about these things with the vampires in particular.
What is it about the vampires? I don't know. So many vampires. Yeah, same thing in Twilight. Edward is, I think, 104 or 109 when he meets Bella, but he's pretending to be a 17-year-old, and she's attracted to like this old soul. Little does she know, he is actually freaking old. And like, I would be really okay, I guess there's a parallel between like dating apps now, and obviously nobody's a vampire, but like when we're on dating apps now and where like Delia's like, are we vampires? But it reminds me of like dating apps now, and like my friends going on dates and being like, oh, this person was absolutely not 28 like they said they were. They were for sure in their late 30s. And like, can those two things be equated? Are vampires the same type of person that would catfish?
I think it's interesting to describe this because what we're kind of talking about is like the ability of maturity. Like I remember just thinking back on times when I was young, like I always wanted to be with somebody who was my own age because I was like, I'm not trying to grow up. Like, I don't know how, I don't want to. It seems stressful. You have to fake it all the time. All my girlfriends were like, let's go to the club. I'm meeting this guy like way older than me. And I'm like, girl, no, I don't know how to be like that. I don't want to, you know? And now when I reflect back on it and I like, you know, you see somebody who's like 27 even, or whatever, like 25 and you're 35 and you're like, wow, like one, you remember what it's like to be them. So you know how lost you are. And two, it's like, you just want to like almost over advise them, like be yourself and all these different things. And then to think about like actually manipulating somebody into a relationship when you know you have so much, like it's, even with ill intention, even without ill intention, I just feel like you hold so much power when you are that much older than somebody. And as they grow, they start to realize like, oh, like I missed out on that, or I didn't do this. Whereas like you had that opportunity. And even more so when we're describing this like vampire, like ancient shit, you know, on top of the fact that they're still messed up. Like Stefan and Damon were like immature, so emotionally abusive, putting so much emotional labor on Elena all the time. And it's like, but you're supposed to be like old and like have learned things, and you're still like doing the same like toxic shit. Like it's very bizarre to me.
The
I
other
feel
thing
like-
is too, sorry, I was just gonna say one thing. Elena
Totally.
also just went through like recent trauma when she like meets them. Like she just lost her parents. And like I just like, I don't know, like something about that even just feels like really gross that like Stefan comes in and he's just like being like, you know, suave and trying to be sexy and whatever. And like this girl is still like processing her trauma, trying to figure out her way through high school when like it seems like nobody around her gives a shit about like what she's been through. And I get that he's trying to be that compassion figure, maybe, but it's just like, I don't know. It's just that part, like I rewatched the first few episodes like recently and I was like, this feels really icky. Like I don't like that.
Icky is a really good word. I feel like, because I was also a huge Vampire Diaries person, and same thing, like I noticed that Stefan and Damon, especially Damon, were quite emotionally immature and like still holding on to trauma and not really doing anything to like not dump it on Elena as if it was somehow her responsibility that she was the doppelganger for someone that she was generations separated from. But for some reason, I feel like the acceptance of this like emotional immaturity between Stefan and Damon and Elena was largely chalked up to like gender roles. It was almost like accepted that the men were somehow less mature, even though they had hundreds of years on her, which was just wild looking back at. I'm like, I would never date someone who did that to me. But that's just me. Sarah, I saw you had your hand
I
up.
have a comment. So I didn't watch the Vampire Diaries, but I love vampires, and hashtag all vampires are queer. So yes, all vampires, we're all queer. It's great. We love them all. However, so this is a conversation that's come up a lot because I'm one of those nerds who was on Tumblr way back in the day. What do you think about vampires as rape culture? Because to become a vampire, it involves like an active penetration, and a lot of times it's not consensual. So you're romanticizing all this like vampire stuff and the sparklies and the blah, but it's also like, that's creepy as hell. Thoughts from the crowd?
1000% yes. As you're saying this, I'm thinking of Rosalie from Twilight. She's the only one in the Cullen clan, if you will, who resented the fact that she was what do they call it? Turned, I think.
Turned.
Yeah. So
Sired and turned. It's
sired.
Listen, I have read Carmilla numerous times. I have problems.
I guess it depends on what era you're from. Too long ago. Yeah, so Rosalie was the only one who was like resentful of the fact that she was turned, and the whole family was just kind of like, ugh, this again, like get over it, Rosalie. Like all of them were grateful for this new life they had with Carlisle, who's their father. And most of them were upset about their like perpetual existence and like needing to feed on blood, whether that was like from humans or animals. And, you know, they make a part of their characteristic is that they're vegetarian because they don't feed off humans. But a lot of them like resent their immortality, but they're not resentful of the fact that they were earned. And like just the treatment of Rosalie through the series is really gross. She's seen as like the bitch because she's upset about her existence and like being a vampire, when like that's entirely valid. It also gives me what's it called, like an NDA? No, not an NDA, a DNR. When people are, because Carlisle's whole thing is like he only turns people who are dying. And like if an NDR existed, DNR, I don't know what it's called, a DNR existed back then, I'm sure Rosalie would have signed it and been like, leave me alone, I want to pass in peace. So very interesting to think about that as non-consent.
I was gonna say too, I was in the nail salon and they had this like really old, it was Halloween time, and it was this like old 80s vampire movie. I'd never seen it before, and I was just like glued. It was so bad. But when you brought that up, Sarah, I was thinking about it because first of all, back in those times, right, like those movies, the vampire was like always beautiful, their skin was always just like, you know what I mean? And then they're like, it's always like dark and like kind of like, you know, the nightlife scene, and then they go into a room and there's like always also like the vampires can sometimes could possess you, right? So they can like convince you of doing something you don't want to do. So in this movie, the vampire like brings her upstairs. Her man has been trying to kill this vampire the whole time, right? And then he seduces her. It's like sexual. And then all of a sudden he bites her and then there's like blood everywhere and it's super intense. And you're like, this is totally non-consensual and super fucked up. Then all of a sudden she's a vampire forever and you're like stuck with this person. And it's like, yeah, I never really thought about it in the essence of like how it can, but it's that sort of that same narrative. Like you meet a hot guy or a hot person in a club, and then all of a sudden, like, you know, you're like kind of dancing with them and it seems a little bit fun, but then after you're like, maybe this isn't for me. And then all of a sudden your life's like changed forever. Right. Because as we know, the impacts of, you know, sexualized violence, you know, for folks can be all kinds of different things. And the healing path is, you know, complex. And so when you brought that up, I really thought about that, because it is always, and also perpetuates the narrative of like the nighttime sexual assault, right? So then it's like, oh, well, yeah, if you don't go outside, then you're never going to get, you know, sexually assaulted. But it's like, no, that's actually not true. But that whole like vampire bad person vibe really like continues that sort of victim blaming and that like narrative creation around sexualized violence. So that's so interesting. Thank you for bringing that up.
Oh my God, can I jump in here? Because I feel like there's another, I was thinking about Van Helsing. Do you remember that? Like the lasciviousness, the like shame that the women experienced who were like seen as more promiscuous or like not fulfilling their gender roles in this like way that fell in line with being good girls, that those were the women that were targeted with mind control and then turned as vampires. And so yeah, the shame stuff. And I, as you were saying that, Sarah, and Alysha, you chimed in with the like possession piece, I'm thinking about like all of the socialization and the shame spirals that people go into when they are convinced that they've gone too far with somebody, or they've represented themselves in a way that was, you know, turning somebody on. And it's like that, all of those narratives around like, you know, making people believe that you're something that you're not, and then you just have to carry on with the situation even if you're not into it or okay with it. And then the siring thing is so fucked, like that you have been spawned by this person, like talk about family violence stuff too, right? That you have this like this connection or this bond with this person who has given you life essentially, and that you cannot say no to this person. The violence that is just leads the garden path towards making taboo all of the things that can happen. And we know that sexual violence happens in families as well. And that the statistics say that it's usually 80% of the time that we know the people and we trust the people that assault us. So yeah, just all of these nuances. Thanks for You're saying that, Sarah.
And
Crazy.
speaking
we're
of
all watching
siren,
it. Oh God. Okay, sorry.
and speaking of siren too, like in the Vampire Diaries, the siren adds a complicating factor because there are some people who cause, or vampires who cause harm in the show and can't be killed because they're connected to like family of like Stefan and Elena and all that. So it's just really wild, that level of control. And like that takes it mind control to a whole other level too. Yeah, really messed up. Joslyn, you have something?
Yeah, I was just thinking like there's this trope has always been interesting to me when it comes to vampires, is like a vampire cannot enter your home unless they're invited in. So you see that in like Buffy, like Vampire Diaries. So I find that really interesting, where it's like, oh, if you don't invite them in, nothing bad's going to happen to you. But as soon as you do invite them in, then you kind of get what's coming to you. Like it's a really like problematic trope. I remember because my sister used to watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer when we were younger, and I never like fully watched it. I would watch it here and there with her when she had it on, and I never understood that trope. I was like, okay, so the vampire can never enter the house, and she's like, no, unless they get invited in. And for on a base level, it just really perplexed me. But then like upon further reflection, I was like, yeah, this is like a really fucked up thing to like, you invite this person to your house because you trust them, and like knowing the dynamics of how vampires kind of infiltrate mortal people's lives. Of course, you're going to trust one and like invite them in. But then all of a sudden, if there's violence or yeah, like things like that happen, it was warranted because you let that person into your house.
And like the alternative is like, oh, if you don't want them in your house and you don't want to be attacked, just never leave your house. Which goes back to what Karen was saying, was like, if you want to keep yourself safe, never participate in nightlife. When first of all, that's not how sexualized violence works. It happens at all hours of the day, but also it happens inside my house and outside. Like there is no safety. So this trope just needs to end. The solution should not be avoiding everything all the time. Yeah, we've been on the topic of vampires for quite a while. I didn't really think about how many vampires there are in pop culture, but I'm realizing it now. Maybe we can shift to The Handmaid's Tale, because that is a piece of media that I cannot make myself watch. I watched the first 2 seasons and it took me about 2 years, I think. They were already out. But I could only watch the show in 15-minute increments. Otherwise, it was dark times for me. But I know Dahlia has very different feelings about it. So I'll pass it off to Dahlia. Let's hear about your perspective in The Handmaid's Tale and see how some other folks feel about it too.
Yeah. Thanks, Alysha. Yeah, so I mean, I read the book in high school because it was part of the curriculum, but I did not retain anything. And didn't love the way that Margaret Atwood wrote, but I wanted to watch the show when it first came out, and completely on the opposite end of the spectrum than you. I was on vacation when it came out and I binge watched the entire thing in like a 48-hour period. And I won't lie, like the ceremony and all of those pieces in the first season literally made me want to crawl out of my skin, as somebody who, like, the idea of having my arms pinned down or anything, like, it literally is a trigger for me. But I think for me, the fascinating part is that this book and the concept was written decades ago, and we're literally seeing this shit in real time, right? Like, it's wild. And I just feel like they did such an incredible job at layering the nuances of power, of the way that people navigate impossible relationships, how people survive in like just boiling point moments in their life, like in situations that one would look at and make up a story about from the outside and just be like, there's no way that anybody could survive that. The ways that they've been able to write the narrative of the story and capture the lived experience of the people is just like mind-blowing to me. They're brilliant. yeah, and Karen and I text each other oftentimes in the middle of the night, either horrified or just like cheering people on. So maybe I'll pass it over to Karen, but just I think maybe I feel like I'm the audience that they wrote it for. It's similar to The White Lotus. Like I literally feel like they wrote it with kind of feminists in mind. And so that feels, I feel connected to it in a different way.
Yeah, for sure. I'm also hearing a parallel here between Van Helsing and, although I've never seen Van Helsing, and Handmaid's Tale, because it sounds like they're like punishing the dissenters. But in The Handmaid's Tale, it's an entire population of people. So, Karen, do you have any opinions on The Handmaid's Tale?
Too many, but I will say, like, in the description, Odalia says, like, you know, I feel like they really did make it like for maybe this demographic of folks. Like, one of the things that I texted Dahlia about that I just can't stop thinking about was the jail that Serena and Fred were in the last couple of seasons. And I think it was the first episode back this season, Serena, who has like made Gilead, basically like is behind all of the different reasons why Gilead even exists, right? Like she was the lawmaker, she wrote a book, she really believed in it so hard, held down, you know, did all of these really nasty, bad things. And she's in jail in Canada, awaiting to see what's going to happen. And the first opening scene is like this beautiful, like sunlight coming in and Serena's hand, and she's doing fucking yoga in fucking jail. And you're like, your skin crawls with anger because you're like, okay, people are in jail right now for like selling a little bit of weed for the rest of their fucking life. And everybody who doesn't have money, who doesn't have privilege, who doesn't know how to speak to systems, who is just completely like not part of the systems giving a fuck about at all, would never even consider, like it would take them years after they got out of jail to even try and consider doing fucking yoga. And this bitch is just there doing yoga. And I think that's what Dahlia's speaking about, where it's like that scene only makes so much sense. And they did it purposefully because you're like, with the sun flare, with the softness, you know, you're like, how is that even fair? It's not, it makes you sick. And so it's like, not just all of the like explicit violence that's happening in that show. It is the implicit, it's the subcontext. It is just the like, the world is created to privilege some people and to underprivilege other people. And that is such a baseline of that entire show. And I think that if you can watch it, and if you are like searching or trying to like understand, like, you know, what it is that everybody's talking about, everybody's confused about, right, left, whatever center you're on, like, or whatever, like, you know, whatever wing you're on, like, I think the show really describes like just how fucked up it is and how fucked up it can be. And the fact that we are living it in real time right now is just mind blowing.
It's the critique on white liberal feminists. Like the fact that Serena can go up a couple of ladder, whatever steps and down, and that it literally will not truly change her existence because of her access to power and her location in relation to the powers that be within Gilead. Like the way that they have like every single place where women and trans folks in that show are placed, like there's a place for everybody. It just depends on your class and your orientation to power and what you can provide the state with, right? And so I think that's the fascinating thing for me, is like really it's calling into question like how when we're interrogating our own privileges and oppressions, it's not good enough to just have experienced oppression within one like category of your life. You can't pretend as though you understand what it's like for other people. And I feel like it actually like shows that, right? So yeah, Serena's in jail and she's had her privileges taken away, her access to liberty and life. But yeah, she's got a bed, that gets made by the looks of things every day by somebody who is not her. She's in a very beautiful apartment building, which she gets a beautiful view, right? Floor to ceiling windows. She's got all these things. And so it's like this constant expression of how power manifests differently for people, you know, whether it's the Jezebels and like their access to like their the space that they've created together and the badass resistance that they've been able to manage because they're on the outskirts of town and they are a little bit less watched in different ways, but also their experience of not having autonomy over their body ever, like those that convergence of like two such different experiences. And the, you know, the women and folks that are sent to, I don't even remember what it's called, where they're like doing hard labor on the land and like the most toxic shit dump on the face.
Yeah, I can't
Right?
remember what
Like
it's
they're
called.
being
Yeah.
poisoned every day, but it's like the midwives and the people that can like actually support the healing of people have been put in the most toxic place ever. Anyways, I'll stop there because now I'm rambling. But
I was just gonna say, I feel like we'd be put there if The Handmaid's Tale was real. That does make me question though, because I'm hearing all of this like in-depth analysis, feminist and intersectional feminist analysis of The Handmaid's Tale, the TV show. And it's making me question if people who don't have as much familiarity with intersectional feminism and like what it means and how it applies to real life are perceiving this show. Because I have no doubt in my mind that there are some white supremacists out there who are loving this show for all of the harm that it perpetuates. So I wonder what y'all's opinions are on how The Handmaid's Tale is both helpful because it's painting this picture for us through our perspective, but is also maybe harmful for folks who aren't looking at it the same way that we are.
why you have to watch it all the way to the end. Because now I don't want to do any spoiler alerts, but like we're in a position now where Lawrence is like actually saying the things. So it was like very obvious in actions that he was taking before that he was like the subversive, like wasn't able to live with himself because he was starting to actually witness and see the impact of his behavior on June, who he connected relationally with, right? We always say how we hate when we have to say like survivors are your sisters and people who you care about and your mothers and your daughters. It's like, fuck, do we actually have to make those connections? But you actually see that, right? That shift when you are human, when you don't have your humanity turned off from the vampire world, and you can actually be in relationship with people and see somebody else's humanity. You start to see Lawrence realize how all of the laws that he piggybacked on Serena's, you know, think tank with and actually like made come to life in Gilead have impacted real lives, right? And namely June. And then you start to see his like eagerness to make repair and to start this like new world that he is starting, but he can't help himself because now he needs the person who has like evoked these feelings for him to fall back in line to make his repair work. But he's actually saying the things now, so it's more clear perhaps for somebody who's just watching it as like a two-dimensional film without going deep, which is why I'm like, you have to watch the whole thing to the end. You must. Alysha, you must. Not that you need it, but you must.
The other
I
thing
don't
I think
know.
too. Oh, sorry. Go. Alysha.
I don't know if I'll succumb to that peer pressure. But as you were saying that, I was also reminded of, Serena, this whole storyline with Serena being the mastermind and how Lawrence was kind of like using his position to boost her. It reminded me of, I can't remember the name of the book. I think I want to say it was something like They Were Her Property or something like that. But it reminded me of like the themes from like slavery times where a lot of enslaved peoples would say the wives were actually worse than the men. So it's just reminding me a lot of like Serena being a POS, and how like wives are all often more involved in committing harm than we think in these systemic issues. So yeah. Karen, did you have to say something you were going to add?
Yeah, I think, one of my best friends who's not in like, he's in the corporate world, she's done really well, super smart, but I call it like, in the on Western, like outside of the Western scope of things, like feeler thinker rather than like a word thinker. And she watches it too. And whenever we like talk about it, she's like, this is just so like, she can feel the bad shit that is actually being presented and how unfair it is. And I think one of the interesting things that happened in this episode, talking about like, second wave feminism, white feminism, the forgiving kind of, there's a vibe, undertone vibe of like forgiveness for Serena because she's had a baby. And just because like, I don't know, like there's these moments. And again, like you're saying, like in slavery times where like the women were actually worse. And this idea that like women are a safe space, but actually they're not. We can say that quite frankly, like going back to J.K. Rowling and TERFs, like it's actually not a safe space for women of color. Women are not actually a safe space for folks of color, so it's like, this conversation is also like so perpetuated into this idea of Serena and also like the other wives in Gilead, who we're seeing a lot more of because that story of their like oppression and also privilege is just so fascinating to witness because we're like, it's the apparent, like it's the common narrative, right? Like white women's feminism, the common narrative, like the pay gap is the common narrative. And so when you see the handmaids actually like facing this really fucked up oppression, but then you see also that the wives are facing an oppression as well, for whatever reason, theirs is worse because they want a baby and that's really important to them. And it doesn't matter at all costs as long as they get a baby, Like in the first seasons you watch, is like the wives pretend that they're having childbirth labor pains as the woman, the handmaid's actually giving birth. And you're like, I can't even explain how fucked up it is because I don't even understand, but it is the most messed up shit you have ever seen in your entire life. And then after, the wife who did not go through childbirth or anything holds the baby and pretends that like she just like gave birth.
And
Okay.
they're like petting her head, the sweat off her head from
Yeah,
it's so like, and this is all amidst like countries in the global south that are literally impoverished because of the World Bank and the IMF relationships with the North, who have women literally selling their uterus so that they can make a living for their families right now, and having women from the North who cannot get pregnant go and live in India for a month while they're surrogate, blah, 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 right? And it's like, yes, there's agency and people get to choose how they make money and keep their families thriving, but like there are larger systemic things here. And I feel like Gilead like represents that so much, right? Where it's like people are people and they're going to do all of these incredible things to survive. And there's all kind of agency that is mitigated and navigated through these systems. And people have varying levels of access to choice along the way. But there's also a puppeteer, and we can't pretend that that puppeteer doesn't have a particular set of values or ideals that they're influencing and injecting into the mix, right? And so when I think about, Karen, I just had to, so in the most recent season, there's a moment where you see June and Serena looking at each other and thinking, what is this farce of a situation here, right? They actually document this like exchange that they have that you don't see in season 1 or 2. And now it's like, as they're trying to humanize Serena, and look at how people can find like repair and forgiveness, there's all these moments that they're now kind of like showing us that they shared together to think about, like, this is ridiculous. Are we actually doing this? But yeah.
That's so interesting. I obviously have not made it that far in the show, so I haven't seen that like unveiling of those moments between June and Serena. But it's really interesting how they're trying to redeem Serena in this way. And I like what you said about like the illusion of choice under these systems. I feel like that's something that we talk a lot about when we're discussing ethical porn and what is ethical versus unethical, and what is the right to choose versus exploitation or like free access to exploitation. So I like that you said that, Dahlia. I'm also thinking about how the illusion of choice plays a role in Game of Thrones, because I read those books, and like the kids, for example, like they're given the illusion of choice. Like I think his name is Rob or something. Where he's like, his mom's like, you don't have to go to war, blah, blah, blah. But he's like, no, I'm the man of the house. Like, this is my job to defend our flag or whatever it is that they defend. And like that series is just so blatantly messed up. I remember being in high school and my friends watching one of the first episodes of Game of Thrones, where it's like Cersei and her brother in the tower where Bran gets pushed off. I feel like, I don't know, that's a whole, like similar to A Handmaid's Tale, a whole new level of messed up that I feel like we have never seen in pop culture before. And Jocelyn, I know that you're like the Game of Thrones person here, so I'm just going to pass it off to you.
Yeah, I think what's like really interesting when Game of Thrones kind of came on the scene, like obviously the books were around for a really long time, but I think like the problematic discourse didn't come until later because people liked how like spicy the show was, because it was stuff that was like being portrayed on television so blatantly that like people had never, I guess, witnessed in that way. Doesn't make it okay by any means, but I think like it was celebrated for that, which I find really interesting by like most people. Like people, I think a lot of times people conflate like raw or real with like things that are really harmful or traumatic, like trauma porn essentially. Like people like, oh, I want to see something real, so I want to see someone getting like fucked up or experiencing like trauma, because to me that's real. But I'm like, we don't have to portray these things in order to be authentic in our lives, right? Like I think that's a really interesting like distinction that people are still kind of like working through. And Game of Thrones is a really good example of that, especially because they portrayed so much gratuitous gender-based violence. And like, I think it really turned a lot of people off, like including me, of just like the way like these like violence against like women is used as like a plot device and like used to like portray like shitty people. But I'm like, we don't need to show that someone's a shitty person. Yeah, I don't know. I think that whole show, even like the new one, House of the Dragon, I've enjoyed it, but there's still like traces of that. And like they still talk about like, yeah, I don't know. I feel like fantasy genres are interesting in that way, and the way that they the way that they kind of portray gender-based violence as like being just like part of like the world. Like, yes, we exist in like a rape culture society today, but like, I don't know, things just seem like more free-flowing in that regard, and it just doesn't seem as much of a big deal. I don't know.
It's much more normalized in the fantasy genres in particular. You said something really interesting about gender-based violence, and it reminded me of Khaleesi and Khal Drogo's relationship, and their entire plot line together is based off of gender-based violence. She was basically, what is it called? Stockholm syndrome into like staying with him and like becoming Khaleesi, which is really messed up, but for some reason nobody really questioned it. Like once she accepted it, the audience seemed to generally accept it as well.
And like people seem to forget she was 13 years old in the book when she got married. Like that was never touched on in the show. They just made her seem like this young kind of virgin bride. But she was 13 years old.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's really disgusting.
That is horrific.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why were we okay with that? And Also, like, I don't know about y'all, but when I picture an incel, I picture someone who is like your stereotypical fantasy lover. But also I've begun picturing people like Andrew Tate. So, you know, I don't know, maybe if it's something about the genre that just like calls people who are willing to accept messed up shit like this. But Sarah, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I've seen some critiques and comments. I don't go here, so I don't have any like deep analysis of the dragons. But I've seen people say, "Oh, that's how it was back then," and I'm like, "Where the fucking history were the dragons? Please point it out to me on a timeline, you fucking weirdos. This is not normal. The dragons aren't real. Sorry, this is not a real thing." You can't normalize your way into rape culture by saying that happened when the dragons were here. No, you can't do that.
I think what's interesting too is that excuse is used as a way to like block diversity within the genre. Like people are like, oh, but like there weren't POC, like what fantasy, like I've seen it with like Star Wars, especially that fandom is so toxic. And I'm a big Star Wars fan. And like just the way that people of color, specifically Black women, are treated, it's just like it irks me to my core, because I'm like, people are blue on the show, and you're mad about like Black women taking a central role in these worlds. Like, I don't like, please tell me where, like, the first like the Star Wars prequels exist and you're mad about Black women in Star Wars. Get mad about those things are terrible. But yeah, I feel like that excuse is used a lot in like fantasy genres to like, like diversity. I know with like the new House of the Dragon show, like there is one house that is predominantly Black, and people are like mad about that too, because they're like the richest house as well. They're the most powerful house technically at that time. And like people will always make this excuse of like, oh, it's just like a diversity hire or something, right? Like just really shitty excuses like that to like make it seem like people of color are being bolstered for some sort of like social justice, like it's a social justice agenda or like whatever the hell, like it's but like these characters are like well written and well developed, which is a frustrating thing to experience, because like I've seen the difference between someone being written into a show because they want to like have this like tokenized like person of color character versus like meaningfully written POC characters whose lived experiences are like honored, or like, you know, they have a richer character development. But I don't know, people just want to stay mad about that kind of stuff, I guess.
And also, like, if you want to say like, oh, well, this is how it was back then, well, that's how it was back then. There were rich Black people back then. Like, what is, if you want to use that argument, you got to take it all the way there. Come on. But also, this just reminds me of the discourse happening with The Little Mermaid right now. Like the live action Little Mermaid. Karen, I see you. Say what's on your mind.
Oh my freaking Lord. Okay, you got like, I have been off social media now like maybe 8 months, but because of this exact reason, but The Little Mermaid, and then people are just like the comment section, like, this is ridiculous. Like what Joslyn said, like people are blue. This is a mermaid. They don't even exist. Why can't they be a person of color? Like, why is there like such, and I think this like goes back to the idea that this like right now we're in this, like, I get it, you know, like our world just got turned upside down and all these different things, and there's so much fear and there's so much confusion and there's all these different things, but it's like everyone seems to think that like inclusion is like for some sort of reason like just axing off anything that anybody else ever knew. And it's like, no, it's just changing and making things better and like accepting different ideas and allowing other folks space like to talk, to be, to present. Like, you know, the one of the things that was really helpful for me after like seeing all that really negative talk about the Little Mermaid, which, by the way, tangent on this, okay, the Little Mermaid used to be my favorite Disney character until I was like, oh, okay, this bitch at 16 years old left her dad for her man, couldn't even fucking talk, and then the angry other woman got jealous, tried to steal him from a man that you just met for 5 seconds. Talk about Twilight, talk about all this shit. I was like, what? no.
Also,
And
Ursula
she-
is queer coded as fuck, so it's like it's queer phobic as hell. Like Ursula is like based on Divine, the drag queen, so that's the whole added level of queer phobia.
And she
Also,
gives
like-
up her voice.
Yeah.
Her voice. Her legs.
Yeah.
Her voice.
Her
Like
legs.
what?
No, I'm not into it. No, it's so bad. And like, then they want to bring her back as like now being somebody like a person of color, a Black woman, so that little Black girls, like, first of all, shouldn't be watching it in the first place. But if they're gonna watch it, at least have somebody that represents them. And then they showed all these videos of these little Black girls being like, oh my God, she's Black. And they were so happy and so excited. And you can't steal that. Like, you can't change that. You can't teach a child to be super excited about something. There's an innocence and an honesty to that. And like, when you grow up a person of color and who doesn't have any representation in Disney except for like Esmeralda, who was literally a gypsy. She wasn't even a princess. People were like, she was a princess. No, she was a fucking poor gypsy. Okay. That's the only person that looked like me for the longest time. That's so unfair. And the hate around it and the like, it is bizarre to me. Bizarre.
I agree. Representation is so important, especially in kids' films. Like I remember growing up and the only like Asian character of significance was Mulan, and she was undoubtedly the least popular princess. Like when you think of Disney princesses, Mulan doesn't even come to mind. So,
But arguably the most badass. So
here.
I just watched it last night. My child's obsessed with Mulan, and I do have to say that like early on in the film, there are some songs where he's like, why are they talking about men like that? Like he's picking up on the toxic masculinity stuff, and I'm like, yes. But it's, yes, she's a huge badass, and I wish that toxic masculinity also did not exist so deeply alongside of misogyny in Disney movies. But Disneyland is so fun. Talk
It
about
is so
joy.
fun.
Yeah.
It is so fun. Yeah, I was just there in October, and I'm not like a Disney adult. Like I'll enjoy a Disney movie here and there, but I'm by no means a Disney adult. But like the immersive experience, like nobody does it better than Disney, truly. So yeah, Disney is super problematic, but we enjoy their trash. And also props to you, Dahlia, for raising your kid to recognize that kind of stuff. That is incredible. Speaking of representation, I feel like now when I'm watching TV shows, I want to look for things that apply to my real life and the things that like call to me. Because I want it to be relatable. I want it to be something that like captures my attention because I'm like, oh, like I know exactly what that feels like. Let me walk through it with this show. And so my criteria of what a good show is now, or what a good movie is now, has greatly changed from when I was a teenager, from when I was consuming media, like with my mom watching her adult TV shows in the early 2000s, like Law and Order SVU. I used to think that, what's her name? Olivia Benson was like the most badass woman on the planet until I realized that she's like, first of all, a cop and like ACAB, but also she's just like a white woman who has been given access to education and schooling and like this privileged career. So like I used to think she was so cool. So I was consuming media like that growing up, and like now I know things are very different and what I'm called to is very different. So what shows have been calling your names recently and why? What is your criteria for what a good show is now?
It has to be gay, and super diverse. You think it's gay enough? No, make it gayer. And then add more gay. Then it's gonna be good enough, maybe. I want gay and I want diverse. That's all I want. Like I grew up in the 90s, like everything was just fucking white and made fun of gay people. And I'm tired of that shit. Let's see diversity and let's see not dead gays. Fuck you, Joss Whedon. Even the cat's like, yeah, calm down. Stop with the barrier gays trope. Make it diverse. Let's just have queer joy for once. And honestly, nothing has really come close to this for me yet. I'm still on the hunt for like a good queer diverse show. If you find one, let me know. Don't say League of Their Own. I have issues with that one.
I first of all have not seen that, but I also have like heard of the problematic
No,
stuff.
it's a fine show.
Okay.
My favorite movie is A League of Their Own, and I'm like, you could have just done a gay period piece and left the baseball out. Like, you don't need that.
Leave
Also,
the
Abby
baseball
Jacobson,
out.
leave the baseball out. Also, Abby Jacobson, take some acting lessons, for fuck's sake. You're bad.
Drag her. I love that.
Can you tell my background in his academic pop culture Discord?
Yeah, for real. For real. I respect that though, because like the only pieces of queer media that I feel like I've seen have good writing are things that are problematic in other ways. So for example, like Blue is the Warmest Color. So deeply problematic, but the writing is just so good. Like the cinematography is beautiful. Same thing with Call Me by Your Name. Like artistically, such a beautiful film, and like the actors do such a good job. Except, you know, Armie Hammer's like, what's
A
going on
cannibal?
with him?
Fuck that guy.
For real,
Yeah.
fuck that guy on so many different levels, for also not being a cannibal, but I also think that he's been outed as a predator too, if I recall.
Oh, gross.
Yeah. But like Call Me by Your Name, beautiful movie, great writing, so problematic for other reasons. So I have no idea what a good piece of queer media is these days, to be completely honest.
If you want one, Saving Face is a good movie. It's gay movie from the, I think, like the early 2000s, and it's all Asian cast for the most part, and so
Nice. Sweet. Yeah, I will put that on my list. Something that came to mind while I was talking about this is Killing Eve. Has anyone seen Killing Eve? Oh, Sandra Oh, Jodie Comer. It's like, it's headcanon queer, so like it's like an underlying unspoken current in throughout the show that they're like in love with each other. But it's so good. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. So like I guess that's my criteria for what a good queer baity, queer adjacent show is.
it's very queer baity, but it's good.
Yes, extremely queer baity. Like the whole primary storyline between the two main characters is very queer baity, but like cinematography, writing, the what's it called, plot twists, they film in so many different locations, like the coloring. I'm more of like an artistic person, I think, when it comes to media. Like I want it to look good and I want it to sound good as well. And Sandra Oh is just queen of my life. I will fall to her feet if I ever come across her in public. Oh, she's incredible. Anyway, I'll pass it along to someone else. Does anyone have any criteria for what a good show is these days?
I mean, I'm fascinated just by the human experience of relationships and like how we are so deeply impacted by our socialization. I mean, I'm a sociology nerd and I have a hard time accepting psychological concepts. So for me, it's just like I'm constant, like I love, you know, I recently watched like Mary J. Blige's like anniversary on her very first album, and she like actually walks through like her emotional experience and what was going on at the time. I love that stuff. Like I love the kind of authentic like experience of how people are living their lives and learning from it, and then like turning those learnings into something else, which is why I also love dating TV shows, because I love watching how we're changing as a society, and whether we are or we aren't, and like different types of shows. I'm a Bachelor Nation, you know, fan. And it's been so fascinating to watch the monogamy stuff like start to shift, and like, you know, the fact that men are actually, because it's not just a whole group of white men anymore, you have men that are actually able to like create relationships with each other and not be in competition for this woman. And so you start to see the narrative around like ownership and monogamy and all of these things start to shift, and I just think it's so fascinating and like very endearing. I did my, you know, a lot of my undergrad in critical studies and sexuality, and a huge undertone of that was the relationships between men that can actually like flourish in environments like sports teams, and the subversive homoerotic stuff fascinates me always. Just like, how do you upend patriarchy? It's by like men being in relationship with each other. Fascinating to me. So that kind of stuff fascinates me, but also things like the White Lotus, I think for me, again, just like so well written. The first season, I think, impressed me more than the season that's currently happening. But talk about representation, the like young bi-race woman that's there with her white friends, family, and walking through her relationship to other Indigenous communities of color and her like relation to power. It's just so good. And
I haven't seen White Lotus, but I've heard very good things about it, so I'll have to add it to my list. I was like, oh, I should watch it in preparation for the stream, and my partner was like, oh, I already watched it, and I was like, come on, brutal. But this just reminded me of Love is Blind. Like, I'm glad that Bachelor Nation and all of that have like come so far, and like you're seeing this like evolution in what like healthy relationships are, and like Love is Blind, season 3 in particular, could not be on the farther end of the spectrum. Like, it is just, it's so bad. Who has seen it, first of all? Joslyn, Bartise
and Matt. Bartise and Matt. Matt is like a walking red flag. I cannot with that man. He like his relationship with Colleen and the way that he treats her and just makes her feel so small. And like everyone on like, I watch a lot of TikToks on Love is Blind because I love to see what everybody thinks of like the characters, and I just want to like engage. But like the fact that like so many people identified Matt's like underlying potentially abusive tendencies towards Colleen because of his own insecurities about his like previous marriage, I was like, this is really fucked up, and you need to like work on that shit before you commit yourself to this woman and like potentially ruin her life. Like, do not do this to her, because she just loves you unconditionally and like wants to make it work.
Like, she loves you unconditionally, but maybe there should be some conditions.
Yeah, but maybe there should be some conditions.
Yeah.
And like, she just wants to fight for their relationship, which I like totally respect. And he just like is so willing to throw it away at like one wrong turn. And I'm just like, you know what, fuck you, dude. And the things he says to her are just so vitriolic and mean when he's like upset. I just did not like him. And Bartise is disgusting.
Like, I was getting mad watching the reunion. I had to pause it a few times to like calm myself down because I was getting so amped. Like, why does he say so many words but nothing is happening?
No,
it's
and
just
like
sound.
This fake commitment to Nancy. I'm like, if you knew that this relationship wasn't going to work because your own like whatever like biases towards like a like physical attraction, whatever, like why are you like gaslighting Nancy into like trying to make it work? Like, I don't understand, dude. Like,
it's another relationship where it's like, it's unconditional, but there should absolutely be conditions. Like, he waited until the altar to just humiliate her like that, and then made it seem like it was somehow her fault.
Yeah. I wish Nancy's brother whooped the shit out of him. To be
I was
quite honest,
watching that and
he was
like,
ready. He was ready. He like walked up, and the way he's looking at this man with such hatred, I was like, just walk up and punch him in the face. Like, just screw this guy. But yeah, this season was a bit of a mess, I'll be honest.
The season was not good. I was absolutely not expecting Alexa and Brennan to be my favorite couple. But I'm glad they are. And you know what? They're still going strong. So Joslyn, Sarah, go ahead.
I want to see an all bi and pansexual version of Love is Blind.
Yes, I was just thinking that the other day.
I want to see like a chaotic bisexuals across the board. Let's go.
Put me on.
I know a bunch who would probably sign up. Like, I can do the casting for you.
Like, I'm in a relationship, but like, put me on. Let's see how it goes. But also shows like that, like if they were to have a bi, pan, trans, like a whole cast, their whole foundation would crumble because it is so heavily based upon separating everybody so they can come together in the pod. So like, I don't even know how that would work. I feel like the writers would just have a really hard time.
The throwback to the 90s shows. Does everybody remember Tila Tequila?
Yeah.
Oh.
Oh my God. You just unlocked like a core memory.
Holy shit. Speaking of
We should have
unhinged,
a watching party.
that's the WAVAW Christmas party. We're gonna watch that.
Okay, but also Flava Flav
Yep.
and Bret Michaels, too much. There were too many celebrity dating shows.
Even Lisa Loeb had one for a while. That's probably too much of a 90s reference for the young folks here. But yeah, she had one for a while.
But Tila Tequila was especially significant because she was, bi, right? They had the like extraordinarily long lines on either side. God,
Yeah.
epic.
And she's turned out to be like a
Sorry,
really
go ahead.
horrible person now.
Yeah. Also with Love is Blind, like it's like, I'm sorry, but it's a low stakes show. Everyone on that show is good looking conventionally. There's like no like variation. Like, I don't know. Like, I think they could like, they need like, yeah, put like diverse people in the writing rooms and like, and whoever's doing the casting, like, let's step it up, people. Like, this is so tired now after 3 seasons.
For real. Like, I was surprised seeing Alexa come on the show being like a plus size woman. I was shocked that they had that. Because like, but even though she's a plus size woman, she also is like still conventionally beautiful in like the body positive way. So it's just like, I don't understand the strategic aspect of that. I also feel like I would not be doing the show service if I did not mention how awful Cole is. What do they call it? Weaponized incompetence? For real. He was awful. Just like, I am a man-child and I'm dating a woman who has her whole life together and I'm intimidated by that. But also at the same time, I want her to do everything for me. And also, I'm going to be really degrading about her appearance. For context for people who haven't watched the show, he was interested in another girl, Colleen, who was a ballerina. She's got blonde hair. She's conventionally very attractive. They had hit it off in the pods, but then he chose, what's his fiance's name? Zineb, I think. Yeah.
Zineb, yeah.
So he ended up picking Zineb because they had a stronger like emotional connection. They left the pods. He saw Colleen at like one of the group events and afterwards was talking about like the whole group experience with his fiance Zineb. And she had asked like, is there anyone that you've seen now that you feel like you would have given another chance? Like, would their physical appearance impact how you interact with them in the pods? And he was like, well, yeah, like you're a 9 out of 10, but Colleen's like a 10 out of 10. And then had the audacity to get mad at her when she got upset at that answer.
Throw the man away.
The whole man.
Throw him away. Just a garbage man. And then in the reunion, he's crying, being like, I'm so sorry I said those things to you. It's like.
And okay, I'm glad that we're talking about this now because I need to get something off of my chest. In that reunion, she talked about like how Cole had made a couple comments about her eating habits and how it destroyed her self-confidence and self-esteem. And Cole was like, I don't know what I said to make you think of that. And so she used a single example of when they were heading out to dinner and he had made a comment about her eating 2 cuties oranges, like the tiny, tiny little oranges. And they showed that clip after the reunion credits had rolled. And it was a completely like innocent interaction where Zineb was like eating some snacks in the kitchen before they went. And Cole was talking about how excited he was about dinner. And he was like, just don't ruin your appetite because dinner's like, I'm stoked about dinner. I want to make sure we enjoy it. And while that single interaction was harmless, that doesn't mean that all of the interactions before or after were equally as harmless. And everyone is treating this little cutie scene as reason to like wipe Cole's slate clean, like forgiving him blindly, as if Zineb probably had reason to misinterpret that comment because he probably made disgusting comments about her body before. So I'm just upset about how everyone is handling this cutie scene. And I just needed to say it.
Agreed.
I have
Thank
not
you.
watched any of the Love is Blind. I have not gone there at all.
Oh, you
But
should.
it also sounds like all of the negging and the pickup artistry tactics that are deeply tied to the incel stuff is like front and center in some of the behavior that is happening.
100%. But also, if I'm gonna watch Handmaid's Tale,
Okay, fine. We'll do an exchange.
I love
Okay,
that.
Alysha, you're
Yes.
on. You're
Sweet
on.
deal. Okay, so Joslyn, Karen, Sarah, I feel like we still have to get to you about what criteria you look for when like looking for a good show these days. I guess Sarah, you've given us like gay. The gayer it is, the better, which is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah, I want gay and I want diverse and I want good writing, and I feel like I'm never gonna get that.
That's not.
I have suffered through some dark times. I watched web series. I was a Tumblr kid for a while, and everything is awful.
Everything's awful. Such a good summary, but also that's not a tall order. So I think you're justified in that. I'll pass it off to whoever wants to go next. Or I'll volunteer. Karen?
Yeah, sure. I can. I think one of the things that I've now, thank the Lord, come into a prime age where I'm like, I'll refuse to watch things that are violent towards Black bodies. Like, I just will not watch it, even if the content is great. I don't give a fuck. I'm not watching it. So that feels really liberating. And yeah, has also changed the way I sort of want to navigate all kinds of things that I want to watch. But due to the fact that I'm a sensitive ass little bitch, I like to watch a lot of just like now, like Netflix, and everybody's on this like biography thing or documentary thing, and I am here for it. Like, I will watch a documentary about fucking mushrooms. I don't give a shit. Like, give me all the facts, give me all the shit. I want the past. I feel like there's crevices that they're leaving shit out. I want to see those bloopers. I want it all. I would love to, if we do one of these things again, like unpack, because I don't understand it, like what, and I have it as well, like what it is about our generation that is this obsession with like serial murders. And I actually, because like there's like Carla Homolka and Paul Bernardino are like the only serial killers, only white serial killers that were killing white people in Canada, and they made a documentary about them, a 4-part documentary about them, and they put it on like Discovery Plus. I fucking paid for Discovery Plus just to watch this series. I have never watched anything on it ever other than that. And I'm not sure why, like what you said, like I like, you know, Prash's treat or whatever. Like, I don't know what it is about our generation that like has this like obsession with it. I'm not able to do some of them. The Jeffrey Dahmer one, I literally was like skipping, like I was just fast forwarding, looking at the little things. Everyone's like, it's so good. I'm like, again, Black bodies, but I was like, I cannot watch this. But yeah, I think that right now, like just because the heavy content of the world, it's complicated for me to engage in any sort of like fictional media. I think a lot of like foreign films do things a lot better. Like we were talking earlier, but like how we have this like idea of like wanting to see trauma as thinking that it's real. And I think it also like ties quite well into like sexualized violence, and like how people want to know like all the details about some sexual like assault, and yet like doesn't want to hear about the impacts. And you know, when I started to do this work, and particularly the work within WAVAW, I was like, oh, I'm so glad that like that's not like part of the conversation at all. I don't give a fuck. I mean, I do if you want to tell me, but I actually don't care about that. Whereas like previously before WAVA, in the like, you know, in the society's world, it was like, oh no, what did it happen? How did it happen? Where did it happen? And I'm like, I don't know why those details are really necessary. And so I think that media right now is still really obsessed with those like details rather than like the impact. I can feel how somebody feels without watching that traumatic experience. And yeah, so those are, I have some like more so like boundaried criteria than like excitement, because I think like Sarah said, it's just complicated to find something that you're actually like, wow, this is so dope and so good and so inspiring. I just don't know if media and society is there yet, storytelling. So I'm sticking with my like biographies and documentaries for a hot minute, and then Euphoria, just because, you know, I'm a little ratchet drug addict high school chick for life. So it's just like way too relatable and so beautiful at the same time.
I wholeheartedly agree. Euphoria just ticks so many boxes for me, even though it is like deeply traumatic to watch.
See, I can't
And-
go there. I
Yeah.
like probably saw about 10 minutes of 2 episodes and I was just like, no, I think I'm gonna go and like be so upset that I might want to crumble in a corner and cry. Like, yeah.
Well, Alysha, to make you feel any better, I keep trying to convince Dahlia to watch Euphoria, and she's like, I literally cannot fucking do it. And I can't either. Like, I'm like, my knees are in my teeth. Like, my partner's like, stop watching. And I'm like, I can't. I'm obsessed. And like, we were talking about this the other day, like how, again, we're like told that these like toxic men are like what I like. If the guy is bad in the show, I want you to be with him. I want to forgive him. I'm down for him. I'm like get irritated when like people are like, you shouldn't be with him. I'm like, bitch, that's my man. I'm not leaving him. Again, going back to the Ashanti thing. This is not leaving my brain, right? But like even Nate's character, who is seriously fucked up, when Maddie goes home and she's just like, I knew I was gonna love him more. I like resonated with that in so many fucking ways. And it's so dark to watch and also so liberating to be like, wow, at least like some parts of my story are able to be witnessed, and for people to understand that like leaving people who are violent to us, leaving people that are abusive to us are just not that easy. And it goes through everyone's past and like, you know, describes how we get there and how we're trying to figure things out when we're in high school and like even after high school, you know what I mean? And like the intentionality that all those kids want to be good, but they're just like really hurt is it's right up my fucking alley. So yeah, but
I think
it's hard to watch.
that's the thing for me is the like witnessing the pain and seeing the degree of harm that comes from being in pain. Whereas The Handmaid's Tale, I'm witnessing the pain, but the resistance is written into it. And so I can stomach it in a different way. I think I'm just like my empathness. I can't tolerate seeing the pain actually take people out. It hurts so much. Whereas June can find the fucking corner to turn shit around. And I'm like, yes. Yeah, that's the difference for me.
Speaking of like the ride by your man kind of thing, have y'all, if anyone has seen Good Girls, you will know immediately who I'm talking about. Okay, so he's the bad guy of the show, but he is so hot, and like he's so hot, like flat out, but he's horrible. Like he's like he runs a whole drug ring, and like the whole point of Good Girls, the plot of the show is that these 3 women are like down and out and like trying to find a way to make money, and one of them like comes across this like money laundering scheme and they get like sucked into it, and then he won't let them leave, so he's the bad guy. But it's just, if you're into trash as a treat and like want to feel that like pining for the bad guy, highly recommend Good Girls. But I'll pass it over to Joslyn. You can share your opinion.
Sure, thanks. Piggybacking off of Karen, like you literally took the words out of my mouth. I don't want to see POC experiences being used as like voyeurism that happens with a lot of like oppressive experiences that POC experience. Like that's so tired to me. I'm just so over it. And especially like in a pop culture, like we like as a society, we still have a fascination with like slavery and wanting to like make a lot of movies about it still. And I just don't understand that. Like I think there's so many ways that we can like celebrate and view like Black experiences, and those shows totally exist. That those like types of media exist, but it's just like the ones that get recognized more, the ones that get, you know, the accolades are the ones that like are exhibiting Black pain and violence against Black people. So it's just, I don't know, like I want to shift away from that. Actually, over the weekend, my partner and I watched Everything Everywhere All at Once, and I sobbed. Like the latter half of the movie, I was just in tears because it's just so beautiful. I think I actually talked about this with JJ, one of our counselors, like that they had said the same thing, that they just cried when they watched it, because it's like, it's funny and weird as fuck, but like the way that they weave in intergenerational family trauma and healing family trauma collectively, like I haven't seen a story like that, because so many POC probably have that story of like healing pain that they've inherited from their parents, and stories of like immigration and like how that has impacted someone's like well-being and being able to flourish in a different place, to severing family ties to like your ancestors and your family back home because of like the choices you're making. Like those things are just so real, and they didn't show it in a way of like, I don't know, it was just like that was like authentic and raw and real to me, and like that just felt like such a great piece of media that I wish, like the writing was just perfect, and like yeah, it was hilarious too, and like existential, like because it's about the multiverse and like how we exist in different universes, but like this mother and daughter's connection kind of is like a focal point throughout the multiverse. And like, yeah, I don't know, I highly recommend everybody watched it, because I was just, yeah, I was a puddle by the end. It was so beautiful.
It's a movie, Joslyn?
It's a movie, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And
I'm
Michelle
really-
Yeoh is in it, and she's like she's like in Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, like she's like a kung fu star, and like they actually like center that in the movie, like her ability to like be a kung fu, like she's a kung fu star in one universe and is able to channel that in her like main body to like fight the evil. It's so cool.
I'm really glad you brought up Everything Everywhere All at Once, because if there's a piece of media that needs to tick all my boxes, it is absolutely that one. And like what you said about like showing the intergenerational trauma, but doing it in a way that's like raw and real is such a good way of saying that, because it is raw and real, but it's not to the point where it's like trauma porn. Like they don't overdo it. And like it resonated so deeply with me, because like my immigrant, refugee, Asian experience dealing with like being the new generation who is queer and like not being understood by my family is like, it's so real. It's so real. Even though like at one point they have hot dogs for hands, like
Yeah.
that's not real, but they still make it feel real.
Yeah.
So it's just such a good, wonderful piece of media. And I'm so glad that we are ending on Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like what a beautiful ending to this stream. Thank you for bringing that up. So folks, we are wrapping up the stream here. I just want to thank you so much for all of your time and taking the time to join us today, and your energy and your opinions on so many pieces of media. I wasn't expecting us to get into this many things, so this is incredible. And if we want to do a stream like this again, I recommend our people watching right now to follow us, so that we can host more streams like this and do more fireside chats and unpack really cool everyday things that we encounter through our WAVAW feminist decolonizing anti-oppressive lens. Also, if you have found any value in this stream, highly recommend. If you would like and have the ability to, consider donating to WAVAW. It's wava.ca/donate, and consider supporting survivors of sexualized violence. We do the work with survivors directly, and your support means everything to us. All right, any closing notes from y'all, or shall we sign off? Sweet. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Thanks for containing us, Alysha. You were great. Great.
Yeah, this was
facilitator.
great.
Appreciate
Aw,
you.
I'm so glad.
Yes, thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
See you.
Bye.